Alrighty guys, welcome back to another little video. I have tried to record this video so many times now, and I keep either getting emotional or going on rants. So I'm going to try and keep it simple and concise and straightforward. Today, we are talking about X58 overclocking motherboards, and why they're just simply no longer a good idea. Okay, so last week I had talked about my little project. Well, here it is. This is a fully hardlined water-cooled X58 PC using the Asus Sabertooth. Now, this was not my first choice of motherboard, and you might notice that the water pump is also missing out of this computer. Well, there is a good reason for both of those. Now, I originally wanted to use this. This is my EVGA For the Win 3 motherboard. I love this thing's aesthetic, and my webcam really doesn't do it justice. This thing is gorgeous with a black and gray color scheme. But, as you guys probably guessed, something went wrong with the motherboard. So, at first, when I had got this motherboard, I thought it was all peachy keen, there wasn't any problems with it. Well, that was until I started messing around with it. I had discovered that it'll run a stock CPU with no issue. But when it came to overclocking, that motherboard simply won't do it. The last owner had overclocked the North Bridge so far to get the BLCK so far that essentially any tampering with the voltages causes it to spike really badly and crash the computer. So anything above stock voltages is simply not an option with that motherboard. And trust me, I've tried everything. Between Uncore, the V-Core, the VRM's North Bridge frequency, trying to keep the North Bridge at stock voltages, nothing will keep it from crashing. So the best overclock that I could get on that motherboard was only a 139 BLCK. And anybody who knows X58 stuff knows that it's a 133 BLCK base. So essentially that motherboard was out. Next motherboard that I was going to use was this bad boy. This is my EVGA Classified. Now, this one is weird. Essentially, my EVGA Classified won't take anything below a low-powered CPU. Or it won't take anything besides a low-powered CPU. Being the fact that I would try something like an i7-920, and it would give me error code FF, meaning fatal failure. Meaning that there was a CPU problem. That's typically what it means on these older X58 motherboards. And I tested out a giant range of CPUs, and I got nothing but FF. So what that told me was essentially that this motherboard had some kind of corruption with it. Either this is a physical defect, or it had something wrong with its BIOS. Now, I did not actually get a chance to update the BIOS on this motherboard. That may fix some of the issues, but I'm not holding my breath. And that brings me to now the third motherboard, being the Asus Sabertooth. Now, I got that board and I thought that it was all great and everything because I was able to get my X5680 up to 4.1 gigahertz without much issue. Well, unfortunately, as I was running a stress test, the dreaded blue smoke started coming out of the North Bridge. Essentially, I blew up that motherboard. Now, at first I thought, how high did I have the voltage? Going back and looking at the footage that I had recorded for this, which I've unfortunately lost, I didn't have the voltage much higher than stock. And the voltage for the CPU was also pretty much at stock. I had it up at 4.1 gigahertz and it fried the entire system. The CPU, the RAM, the motherboard. At first I thought it was power supply, so I swapped out power supplies, and nope, that didn't do anything. So, that kind of brings me to where I am today. I have essentially 3 non-working X58 motherboards. I know technically I haven't really exhausted the classified yet, but don't forget, earlier last year, I was building with an EVGA For the Win, I believe the original For the Win, or what was it, an EVGA SLI 3. I forget exactly what the model number was, But that particular CPU would only take an i7. It would not take a Xeon. Under any circumstances, it would not take a 6-core Xeon. I had updated the BIOS, I had rolled back the BIOS, and then updated the BIOS again. It would not take a 6-core Xeon. Something was physically wrong on that motherboard to where it would not take a 6-core Xeon, and I'm afraid something like that's happening with this classified board. So where exactly does this leave me? Well, this. Guys, I think the days of overclocking on X58 motherboards has kind of come to its end. I don't want to be that guy who's just Mr. Negative Nancy all the time, but it's just not worth it anymore. I've spent so much money and so much time working with X58 motherboards that oftentimes just straight up don't work. And I have one more board here. Arguably, actually not arguably, straight up just my nicest X58 motherboard that I own, which is the Gigabyte G1 Killer Gorilla. Now, there's nothing physically wrong with this board. It is in fine shape. The only issue comes into play when you realize the driver support for this thing is just absolutely terrible. I cannot use the onboard audio with Windows 10 or Windows 11. They bricked the drivers for some reason, or somehow, I don't know. So you have to use an external sound card. If you want to use the onboard internet NIC, you download the drivers, which then causes the drivers to GIMP whatever internet device you have. I'm talking, when I put in my external Wi-Fi card, it was only doing 10 megabits down and 1 megabit up. And my Wi-Fi normally, like on my daily driver, which is a T3500, would be at 120 megabits down and 20 megabits up. So it obviously was something that had to do with the drivers of that motherboard, and making it almost impossible to use on Windows 10. Now, I could get it to work, but an external Wi-Fi card, an external audio card, as well as my graphics card just fills up the case a lot, and it's not what X58 could be. It's more jumping through hoops than actually using a system. All of these old X58 motherboards have one thing in common. They're old. We've always known that X58 is getting older and older, but here's some perspective. The youngest X58 motherboards are now 11 years old. The oldest are 13. That's odd. That's a lot. That is old. And it kind of brings me to this one little point. I don't think overclocking motherboards are worth it anymore. Let me redirect you guys towards my T3500. This computer, no issues. Now, once I eliminated the original power supply, all of my issues with this computer just went away. And it was amazing how something like that could happen. Well, it turns out the old power supply was going bad. And all I needed was a standard ATX power supply for a T3500. My T3500 runs my W3680 at 3.86 gigahertz all day, every day. No issues. That has a better, more stable overclock than any of my X58 motherboards that were designed for overclocking. And I'm not trying to go off on a rant here, but why the heck would I spend $100 on a motherboard when I can buy an entire freaking computer for like $60? That works better. And it's frustrating to me that I've spent so much time trying to get these stupid motherboards to work, and it's just constantly smashing my face against a brick wall. And so I've kind of come to this conclusion, and I didn't want to make this video. But old X58 overclocking boards just aren't good. If you want to get into X58, which I highly recommend by the way, there's only 2 ways to do it. Chinese motherboards, which I honestly highly recommend. Actually, I'm going to be doing a video on this guy, because I feel like he deserves a little bit more love than what I gave him originally, but I digress. Either Chinese motherboards or old OEM workstations. And before someone comes up with the obvious argument, well, the old OEM workstations are just as old. Yes. But They did not spend their entire lives being heavily overclocked. They did not spend their entire lives being heavily used and abused. I have now built 2 T3500s, the Joker and my PC. The Joker PC is fine. My PC runs it better than I could have imagined. And I have no issues with it. Every time I hit the power button, it works. And so this is where I think the video is going to end. I didn't really want to make this video about negativity and anger over overclocking X58 motherboards, but I just can't do it anymore. I can't spend a huge amount of time, money, and energy trying to make these stupid things work when they just don't. And if you can get them to work, if you've got a overclocked X58 system with one of these motherboards, good. Hold on to it. Don't change anything. Just don't. The moment you start changing things, it's going to start dying on you. It's happened to me now numerous times, and I'm just tired of it. With everything going on in my life, I just don't need that level of stress. But that is a story for another day. As always, I'll see you guys later. Peace.